Habits are not just things we do, they are quiet statements about who we believe we are. Every action we repeat becomes a seed planted in the soil of our identity. Over time, those seeds grow roots, shape our mindset, influence our decisions, and design the trajectory of our future. Most people think life changes through major breakthroughs, dramatic decisions, or once-in-a-lifetime moments, but the truth is far simpler. The smallest behaviors, repeated consistently, mold the person we eventually become. Change doesn't begin with a sudden transformation. It begins with a subtle shift in what you choose to do today. When you watch someone who seems disciplined, confident, or successful, it's easy to assume they were born with something special. But that's rarely the case. What you're really seeing is the accumulation of small, almost invisible daily choices. Tiny habits that seem insignificant on their own, but powerful when repeated over time. These habits create a feedback loop between action and identity. When you do something repeatedly, you begin to believe that this is simply who you are, and once your identity shifts, your actions naturally follow. The cycle strengthens itself, but the challenge is that habits don't shout, they whisper, and because they whisper, we ignore them. Waking up 10 minutes earlier doesn't feel life-changing. Reading 2 pages of a book doesn't feel productive. Saving a small amount of money doesn't feel impactful. Saying one kind word to yourself doesn't feel transformative. Yet these micro decisions, these moments where nobody is watching, are exactly where your future is shaped. Small habits are easy to overlook, but they are also the only reliable way to create lasting change. Big decisions set direction. Small habits build momentum. Identity change begins when you stop asking, "What do I want to achieve?" and start asking, "Who do I want to become?" That shift is everything, because goals can motivate you, but identity sustains you. A person who tries to read a book may read for a few days, but a person who believes they are a reader continues even when motivation fades. Someone trying to get fit may start strong and disappear after a week, but someone who believes they are the kind of person who cares for their body finds a way, even on tough days. Belief comes from action, not the other way around. You don't wait to feel confident before acting. You act your way into confidence, and the smallest habit is often the beginning of that belief. When you choose water instead of soda, you're casting a vote for a healthier identity. When you write for 5 minutes, you're casting a vote for a creative identity. When you choose patience instead of anger, you're casting a vote for a resilient identity. You don't need to be perfect, you only need to be intentional. Every small decision is a brushstroke on the painting of your future self. But the real power of habits goes beyond personal transformation. Your habits set the tone for the people around you. When you show consistency, others notice. When you take responsibility, others follow. When you grow, you give permission for others to grow. Self-leadership is the beginning of all leadership. Before you can inspire others, you must first inspire yourself. And nothing inspires you like the proof that you can follow through on the commitments you make to your own future. Many people wait for motivation to strike, not realizing that motivation is unreliable. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. When you take even the smallest step, your brain registers progress, and progress fuels momentum. That momentum becomes confidence, and confidence becomes belief. Before you know it, a single tiny habit becomes a powerful part of your identity. Small habits also create stability in a world full of uncertainty. You cannot control everything around you, but you can control the rituals that structure your day. A short morning routine, a moment of gratitude, a few minutes of reflection. These tiny anchors keep you grounded when life becomes chaotic. They give you a sense of direction when everything else feels unpredictable. They turn ordinary days into opportunities for growth. And perhaps most importantly, small habits protect you from the illusion that transformation requires suffering. Growth doesn't have to be painful. Discipline doesn't have to be harsh. Change doesn't have to be overwhelming. Sometimes the most profound transformations happen quietly, steadily, gently. You don't need to change everything at once. You just need to begin. Small, simple, consistent. Your habits tell a story about the life you're building, and the beauty of that story is that you can rewrite it anytime. It doesn't matter where you've been. What matters is what you choose today, because your future isn't shaped by the big moments you dream about. It's shaped by the small habits you live out. Small, consistent actions have always carried a power that most people underestimate. We live in a world obsessed with big wins, dramatic changes, and overnight success stories. We celebrate the people who achieve something remarkable, yet we overlook the countless small steps that brought them there. The truth is, greatness is rarely the result of a single decision. It is almost always the result of a series of tiny, repeated choices. Choices so small that on any given day they seem to make no difference at all. But over time, these choices compound, and that compounding effect is what separates those who grow from those who merely hope for growth. The temptation to chase big actions comes from our desire for quick results. We want to start a new goal and immediately feel transformed. We want evidence fast, but transformation doesn't happen at the speed of impatience. It happens at the speed of consistency. When you do something small every day, something manageable, something that doesn't overwhelm you, you build trust with yourself, and that trust becomes the foundation for bigger achievements later. It's easy to take a huge leap once. It's much harder to take a small step every day, but the small step is exactly what builds the discipline required for the leap. Think about the way a river shapes a mountain. It doesn't crash through with force. It doesn't carve with intensity. It shapes with consistency, with slow, patient, almost invisible movement. Over years, over decades, over centuries, the river changes the form of something that once seemed unchangeable. Our lives are shaped the same way, not through one moment of extreme effort, but through countless moments of steady intention. The challenge is that we often judge progress in the moment rather than over time. When you go for a short walk, you don't feel healthier. When you read a single page, you don't feel wiser. When you save a small amount, you don't feel wealthier. The absence of instant results convinces us that these small actions don't matter. But that is the lie that keeps most people stuck, because progress is almost always invisible at first. You don't feel the shift happening. You only notice it later when you look back and realize everything is different. Consistency wins because it rewires you from the inside out. It teaches your mind to show up even when you don't feel like it. It teaches your emotions to stay steady even when life is unpredictable. And it teaches your identity that you are someone who honors your commitments. The size of the action is irrelevant. It is the pattern of self-trust that changes you. When you keep a tiny promise to yourself, you send a message to your brain, I follow through. And that message strengthens every time you repeat the action. Massive, inconsistent efforts fail not because the action wasn't big enough, but because the foundation wasn't strong enough. You can sprint for a few days, but you can't sustain it forever. Burnout is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that the strategy was wrong. Sustainable growth is built on rhythms, not explosions. It's built on gentle, repeatable behaviors that gradually shift your identity and your capabilities. Consistency creates a pattern becomes a habit becomes a lifestyle, and that lifestyle shapes your destiny. Another reason small habits matter is because they remove resistance. When a habit is small, it's easy to start. And starting is where most people fail. They try to begin with something too ambitious, something that requires willpower, something that demands emotional energy, but small habits bypass that struggle. They invite you in, they whisper instead of scream, they allow you to succeed today, and that success creates the emotional fuel you need for tomorrow. A small win may not look impressive, but it creates momentum, and momentum is far more valuable than motivation. Consistency also creates predictability in a world full of chaos. Life will always change, circumstances will shift, challenges will appear without warning, but the small actions you commit to become an anchor. They give you stability when everything else feels uncertain. They remind you that you have agency, that you still have control over the trajectory of your life. The world may influence you, but your habits shape you. And perhaps the most beautiful part of small habits is the humility they teach. because they don't allow for ego. They don't reward you instantly. They require patience. They require faith. They require a willingness to do the unseen work. And that humility becomes a powerful strength. When you learn to stay consistent without applause, you develop a discipline that doesn't depend on external validation. You become someone who grows quietly, steadily, confidently. When you look at someone who seems extraordinary, you're not seeing their big moment. You're seeing the compound effect of years of small, consistent habits. Habits they chose even when they felt tired, uninspired, or doubtful. And that's the most empowering part. Greatness is not reserved for a few. It is accessible to anyone willing to embrace small actions done consistently. The life you want is built through the habits you repeat. Not the habits you dream about, not the habits you start for a week, but the habits you commit to even when the payoff isn't visible. Small, consistent actions may not feel powerful in the moment, but they are the quiet force that changes everything. Self-awareness is the beginning of every meaningful change. It is the mirror we must be willing to look into, even when the reflection is uncomfortable. Most people want to improve their lives, but they don't slow down long enough to understand what truly drives their choices. They chase goals without understanding their motivations. They adopt habits without asking whether those habits serve the future they want. They react to life instead of intentionally shaping it. And because of this, they stay stuck, not because they lack potential, but because they lack clarity. Growth begins the moment you pause and ask yourself honest questions. Questions that don't allow you to hide behind excuses. Questions that force you to confront what is real, not what is convenient. Why do you do what you do? What are you afraid of? What patterns keep repeating in your life? What habits drain you? What choices elevate you? Self-awareness isn't about judgment, it's about understanding. You cannot change what you do not understand, and you cannot build the future you want if you're blind to the behaviors that hold you back. Intentional daily choices come from knowing yourself deeply, your values, your tendencies, your triggers, your strengths, your weaknesses. When you gain this clarity, your habits become purposeful instead of reactive. You begin to choose out of alignment, not impulse. Most people allow their day to control them. They wake up and fall into routines they never chosen consciously. They scroll without thinking, rush without intention, react without reflection. But a meaningful life demands that you stop letting the day lead you and instead begin leading the day. Self-awareness teaches you the difference between what is urgent and what is important. It helps you see where your energy is being wasted. It reveals the small decisions that sabotage your growth. Decisions that seem harmless but accumulate over time into patterns that shape your identity. A meaningful life doesn't come from dramatic changes, it comes from intentional ones. When you understand why you choose what you choose, you gain the power to choose differently. You begin to replace habits that drain you with habits that build you, but self-awareness is uncomfortable. It forces you to confront truths that you may have ignored for years. It exposes insecurities, contradictions, and unresolved pain, and that is why most people avoid it. It's easier to stay busy than to stay honest. It's easier to distract yourself than to examine yourself, but the cost of avoiding self-awareness is high. You repeat the same behaviors, cycle through the same frustrations, and wonder why nothing changes. Awareness doesn't solve your problems, but it gives you the power to stop creating them. Growth begins when you stop blaming circumstances and begin taking responsibility for your choices. Not responsibility in the sense of guilt, but responsibility in the sense of ownership. When you recognize your patterns, you realize you have the ability to create new ones. You are not stuck with the habits you inherited. You are not bound to the routines you drifted into. You have the power to redesign your life one choice at a time. Intentional daily choices don't have to be dramatic. They can be as small as pausing before reacting, choosing gratitude over frustration, reading for a few minutes instead of scrolling, or drinking water instead of grabbing something unhealthy. These small choices, made consciously, build a foundation of discipline and purpose, and discipline is not about restriction. It is about freedom, the freedom to live a life that feels aligned, the freedom to break old cycles, the freedom to become the person you know you can be. When you develop self-awareness, you begin to recognize the gap between who you are and who you want to be, not as a source of frustration, but as a map. That gap tells you where to focus. It reveals what needs attention. It gives direction to your efforts, and slowly, choice by choice, you begin bridging that gap. You begin growing into the identity you desire. You begin becoming someone you are proud of, not because of external achievements, but because your actions finally reflect your core values. Intentional choices also protect your energy. When you know your triggers, you stop walking into situations that drain you. When you know your strengths, you begin using them intentionally. When you know your weaknesses, you design habits that support you instead of sabotage you. You stop running on autopilot and start moving with purpose. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop following patterns and start creating direction. Self-awareness also strengthens your relationships. When you understand yourself, you communicate more clearly. You listen more deeply. You respond with more empathy. You stop projecting your insecurities onto others. You stop assuming and start asking, and relationships built on understanding, both of yourself and others, become stronger, healthier, and more meaningful. When you lead yourself well, you naturally begin leading others better, not through force but through example. But perhaps the most powerful part of self-awareness is that it gives meaning to your habits. When you know why you are doing something, you are far more likely to stay committed. Purpose fuels consistency. Discipline becomes easier when you're not just chasing a goal but honoring a value. When you understand your motivations, your actions become aligned. And alignment creates peace, the peace of knowing that your daily choices reflect the life you want to build. Self-awareness and intentional action form a partnership. One reveals the path, the other walks it. One provides direction, the other provides momentum. Without awareness, your habits lack meaning. Without intentional habits, your awareness lacks impact. Together, they create transformation. Not loud, dramatic transformation, but steady, authentic, deeply rooted transformation. Your life is shaped by the choices you make every day, and the most powerful choices are the ones made with awareness and intention. Growth doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you decide to pay attention. It happens because you choose to live your life deliberately instead of drifting through it. And once you begin living with that kind of intentionality, everything changes, not all at once, but inevitably. The people we surround ourselves with, the teams we build, the families we nurture, all of them are shaped by the habits we practice when no one is watching. Leadership is not something that begins in a meeting room or on a stage. It begins in the quiet, private moments when you choose discipline over comfort, courage over fear, patience over frustration. The habits you carry within you become the energy you project into the world, and whether you intend to or not, you influence others through the example you set. This is why self-leadership, the ability to lead yourself, is the foundation of all leadership. Every day, your habits send signals. When you show consistency, people learn they can rely on you. When you practice honesty, people learn they can trust you. When you communicate with empathy, people feel safe around you. And when you take responsibility instead of making excuses, people feel inspired to do the same. You don't have to demand influence. Influence grows naturally when your actions reflect values that others admire. Leadership isn't something you declare, it's something you practice through every small decision you make. There is a misconception that leadership is about controlling others or having authority, but real leadership is about modeling behavior. People don't follow titles, they follow examples. They follow clarity, humility, and consistency, and those qualities are not born from speeches or declarations. They're built through the quiet habits you commit to every single day. When you maintain your morning routine, when you practice gratitude, when you listen more than you speak, you are shaping not only your own character but the environment around you. The habits you practice affect how people feel in your presence. If you are anxious, your team will feel unsettled. If you are calm, they will feel grounded. If you are disciplined, they will feel motivated. If you are scattered, they will feel unsure. Humans are emotional mirrors, often unconsciously absorbing the behavior of the people they spend the most time with. That means your self-leadership has a ripple effect. A tiny habit, something as small as pausing before reacting, can shift the dynamic of an entire relationship or team. What people admire most is not perfection, it is consistency. Nobody expects you to be flawless, but when you show up every day with intention, even in small ways, you show people what integrity looks like. You show them what commitment feels like. You show them what growth requires, and you give them permission to show up that way too. The habit of practicing small disciplines, whether it's keeping your promises, showing up on time, or taking a moment to reflect before making decisions, sets a standard that others naturally rise to. And it's not only the good habits that influence people. The habits we avoid, the patterns we neglect to fix, those influence others as well. When you constantly react emotionally instead of thoughtfully, you teach others that emotions lead and logic follows. When you procrastinate, you normalize delay. When you refuse to take responsibility, you create a culture of blame. People don't copy what you say, they copy what you do. This is why self-leadership is so important. You cannot expect consistency from others if you do not practice it yourself. The best leaders are not the ones who try to appear strong. They are the ones who lead with authenticity. They acknowledge their mistakes. They admit when they don't know. They show vulnerability without losing direction. And these qualities come from habits such as reflection, humility, and the practice of daily learning. When you build habits that strengthen your character, the people around you benefit from that strength. They trust you not because you are perfect, but because you are real. Small habits also shape the way you make decisions. A person who practices daily reflection becomes a leader who thinks clearly under pressure. A person who practices gratitude becomes a leader who sees possibilities where others see obstacles. A person who practices patience becomes a leader who guides instead of commands. These qualities are not traits you inherit, they are muscles you build. They grow stronger every time you practice the habit, even in the smallest moments, and the influence you have on others is often invisible to you. You may not realize that a small gesture, holding your composure in a stressful situation, offering a calm explanation instead of a harsh reaction, sticking to a routine even when it's difficult, might be the moment someone else decides to do better. You might not see the way you inspire someone to be more disciplined, more courageous, or more thoughtful. Influence is quiet, leadership is subtle, and small habits are the seeds from which both grow. When you lead yourself well, you create an environment where others also want to lead themselves. You set a tone that encourages accountability, growth, and respect. People feel safe to challenge themselves because they see you doing the same. They feel comfortable embracing their own small habits because you've shown that real transformation doesn't require dramatic gestures, it requires consistent commitment. And perhaps the most powerful truth is this: the people who look up to you, your family, your friends, your colleagues, aren't inspired by what you achieve. They are inspired by who you become. Titles may impress people for a moment, but character inspires them for a lifetime. And character is built through the habits you repeat. Self-leadership is not about controlling others, it's about mastering yourself. It's about choosing habits that reflect the kind of person you want to be and the kind of influence you want to have. Because the world doesn't change when you tell others what to do, it changes when you start living in a way that shows them what's possible. Your habits are your leadership, your choices are your example. And your example is the most powerful influence you will ever have. A meaningful life is not something we discover by accident, it is something we build with intention, and the materials we use are the habits we practice every day. Most people drift through life on autopilot, repeating routines they never consciously chose. They wake up, work, react, and repeat. They move through their days without asking whether their actions reflect the life they actually want. But a meaningful life requires more than activity. It requires alignment. It requires that your habits reflect your purpose rather than your comfort. Purpose is not a grand, dramatic revelation. It's not a billboard moment or a sudden spark of clarity. It's something we uncover slowly, through the choices we make and the things we pay attention to. and the habits we build become the clues that point us toward that purpose. When your actions reflect what matters to you, growth, kindness, discipline, creativity, you begin to feel a sense of internal harmony. You begin to feel that you're not just living, but living intentionally. That sense of alignment is what gives life meaning, but the challenge is that comfort often pulls us away from purpose. Comfort invites us to stay the same. Comfort whispers that we don't need to try today, that tomorrow is a better time to start, that the small effort isn't worth it. Purpose, on the other hand, invites us to stretch, to make the kind of choices that require effort, honesty, and courage. And this is why small, purposeful habits are so important. They allow you to align with your values without overwhelming yourself. You don't need to change everything at once. You only need to choose what matters in small and consistent ways. When you create habits that reflect your purpose, you create a structure for your life that supports your growth. A person who values health builds habits that honor their body. A person who values courage builds habits that challenge their fears. A person who values connection builds habits that nurture relationships. It's not the size of the habit that matters, it's the intention behind it. A small, purposeful action done every day is more powerful than a dramatic gesture done once in a while. Meaning grows in the repetition. Purpose-driven habits also bring clarity. When you begin living with intention, decisions become easier, opportunities become clearer, distractions lose their power. You stop wasting time on things that don't matter because your habits continually remind you of what does. The routines you build become guideposts. They pull you toward your values even when life becomes chaotic. When everything around you feels uncertain, purposeful habits give you something solid to stand on. Meaning is not found in goals alone. Goals are results. Habits are processes. Goals motivate you temporarily, but habits shape your identity permanently. And a meaningful life is a life where your identity is rooted in what you value most. This is why building habits that reflect your purpose is so transformative. You are not just changing what you do, you are changing who you become. And becoming someone who lives with alignment is the greatest gift you can give yourself. Living intentionally also changes the way you experience your days. When your habits align with your purpose, even the simplest actions feel significant. A morning routine becomes a grounding ritual. A moment of silence becomes a reminder of your values. A short walk becomes an act of self-respect. A conversation becomes an opportunity to connect deeply. Meaning isn't found in extraordinary moments. It's created through ordinary habits done with intention. Many people search for meaning as if it's something external, something hidden somewhere in the world. But meaning is something we create through the way we choose to live. It's the reflection of our values in our actions. It's the consistency of living in a way that feels true. The habits you build every day. How you wake up, how you speak, how you treat others, how you treat yourself, are the threads that weave your life's purpose into reality. A meaningful life is also a courageous life. It requires you to choose purpose over convenience, growth over comfort, alignment over autopilot, and courage is not built overnight. It's built through repeated small actions that challenge you just enough to expand your identity. When you consistently choose habits that align with your deeper values, you strengthen your capacity for courage. You teach yourself that you can do hard things. You develop resilience, patience, and confidence, not because you made one big leap, but because you made 1,000 small, purposeful steps. Your habits also determine the legacy you leave. People will remember your achievements for a moment, but they will remember your character for a lifetime. Character is built through repeated actions, through the integrity of showing up, the discipline of honoring your commitments, the kindness of your interactions, the courage of your decisions. These qualities are not accidents. They are the result of habits that reflect your inner purpose, and the beauty of living a meaningful life is that it doesn't just impact you, it impacts everyone around you. When you live with intention, you inspire others to do the same. When you align your habits with your values, you create an environment where authenticity feels possible. People feel your purpose even if you never speak it aloud. They see it in the way you carry yourself, the way you respond to challenges, the way you treat others. Meaning radiates outward. A life aligned with purpose is not a perfect life. It's not a life free from stress, doubt, or difficulty. It's a life with direction, a life where even the struggles have meaning because they move you closer to who you want to be. And alignment doesn't happen by wishing or hoping, it happens by choosing habits that reflect your values, choosing actions that reflect your vision, choosing a path that feels authentic rather than easy. You don't build a meaningful life by waiting for clarity. You build clarity by living intentionally. You build purpose by acting in alignment. And you build transformation through small habits that reinforce the identity you want to embody.